Great. Next, I'm honored to introduce Andre Liu, the president of the International Foundation of Organic Agricultural Movements. He will explore the topic of his book, The Myth of Safe Pesticides and Why Organic Means Business.
Thanks for that, and it's a pleasure to be here. Just a little bit about us, IFOAM. We're IFOAM Organics International. We're the only umbrella body for the organic sector worldwide. We have around 800 member organisations in 125 countries, including here in the USA. I'd just like to actually introduce you to Peggy Myers, who's one of our world board members in the US, and David Gould, who runs our North America office. The organic sector is actually the fastest growing and best known brand or label in the whole eco-label, sustainability labels. And, IFOAM, we work with the Institute of Organic Agriculture in Switzerland, and we put together the statistics for every year. This is the latest ones we have. And by 2013, we've grown to a value of 72 billion US. That's for the certified organic industry. If you can see the trend line there, in 1999, we're worth 15.2 billion. Despite the global downturn, we are growing faster than any other multi-commodity agricultural sector in the world. Similarly, this other chart will show the rate of growth of certified agricultural land, and that's up to 43 million hectares, which is, over 100 million acres. But I think this next slide, in many ways, is more relevant if you want to put it into perspective. And this is when we look at how much the average person in any country spends on organic products. The leader is Switzerland. This is in euros. I can say it's 70 euro cents to a US dollar. So 21 euros there actually equals, so 210 euros there equals 300 US dollars. That's Switzerland. The US, it's about $100 spent per year per person. So if you put that into perspective, it's a very small spend. People spend far more on their monthly phone bill than they do buying organic. And organic is the best known of all the sustainability brands. So, one way to look at it is, yes, we've got a lot of opportunity for growth. But how do we get that growth? And I think that's the really important thing. How do we move from being such a small percentage to the mainstream? And part of the research that we've looked at, and there's a lot of studies all around the world, when we find out, who is the organic buyer or the new organic buyer, and they tend to be mums and dads. At the point where people are about to have babies, life changes, and they start thinking seriously about the health of their children. And when we also look at their reason for buying, and there's a lot of reasons for buying organic: environmental, animal welfare, taste, fairness. But the primary one is health. That is number one why people buy organic. And then when we unpack that and look at, in health, what is the number one? It's not nutrition. It is pesticides. That is the main thing they're concerned about: food additives, synthetics in food. So this is actually a really important issue here. The regulatory authorities will tell you that there's no need to worry about pesticides in food. They're safe. It's all done scientifically. There's a huge margin. Generally, the residues are 1,000 times lower than what is dangerous. So you don't have to worry about pesticides. And a good example of that was 2 weeks ago. People are aware that a very good study was put out showing that if you ate some organic foods, you'd reduce the pesticide levels by 50%. The response from regulators and the scientific community is, well, that's irrelevant because it's safe anyway. So what does it matter if you've got 50% less? go ahead and eat normal conventional fruits and vegetables because they're healthy for you. And I think that needs to be looked at critically. So over the years, I did a lot of research to actually look at the science here and compile it in a book. And I based this on good science, but written it in plain English so people can understand, because the science is quite technical. And the critical thing here is that the fact is that we actually have no evidence-based science to show that any level of pesticides are safe. There are so many data gaps, and the methods for testing are very obsolete. Excellent methodologies 150 years ago, but given the methodologies we have now and the thousands of scientific papers, the smallest residues are unsafe, and especially for children and the unborn. The concern that new parents have by avoiding pesticides is more than justified. And the data we have shows that the smallest amount of pesticides will lower IQs. It's a major cause of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism spectrum of disorders, lack of physical coordination, loss of temper, anger management, bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, childhood obesity. All of these are on the rise. An example is this, autism. And this is from a paper that Dr. Nancy Swanson did most of the research. I helped to write it up, and we had it peer-reviewed, so it's a peer-reviewed scientific paper. And the bar charts are the rise in autism here in the USA, and the line is the rise of Roundup, glyphosate, that is used on GMO corns and crops. The Roundup level has gone up since 1995, 97, when GMOs started. And you can see that that curve exactly matches. In fact, the data that we did statistically shows that it's a 1 in 10,000 chance that that is coincidental. The statistics are showing at this rate of growth that in 20 years' time, 1 in every 2 children will be autistic, and that is very alarming. Another good example is the United States President's Cancer Panel report from a few years back. And this should have been headlines around the world, but it gets ignored. And this is a very good report. It's done by 30 of the best scientists in the US, from the CDC, from the National Institutes of Health and other prestigious organisations. And what they clearly said is that 80% of cancers come from environmental causes, the majority of which are due to chemicals and pesticides. And what they expressed was a concern that these chemicals are being passed on to children prenatally and through breast milk. In fact, children are being born pre-polluted with chemicals. The Environmental Working Group found up to 232 chemicals in placental cord blood here in the USA. The United States President's Cancer Report shows that, for instance, leukemia is elevated in families that farming families, but just people who use household pesticides. And they also show how the rates of childhood cancer are increasing here in the United States. It's not going backwards, and this is due to chemicals. The other scientific research, and this is the critical thing, when chemicals are tested, they don't do any testing specifically for the developing fetus and the unborn. They just use adolescent animals. But what the scientific research shows is that the fetus and the unborn don't have the same protective proteins, serum proteins, that adults have to break down these chemicals. So they are very sensitive to the smallest amount. And what they're finding is what we call developmental neurotoxicity. This is where the smallest amount of these chemicals damages the development of nerves. The biggest collection of nerves we have is our brain. And, for instance, this is one of the quotes from one of the bits of scientific research showing that, chlorpyrifos and other organophosphates have immediate and direct effects on neural cell replication. To put that into plain English, neural cell replication means the normal growth of nerve cells. So when the fetus is growing and developing the brain and other parts of the nervous system, that is being damaged. Oh, sorry, I went the wrong way. My apology. This is an example, one of my favourites, in Mexico, in Sonora region, and two groups of children, one on the lowland area that are exposed to pesticides in farming communities, the other one in the foothills where they don't get it. These are 2.5-year-old girls. The ones in the foothills, they get to draw a picture of children, and it's just what we'd expect a 2-year-old or 3-year-old girl to draw. The ones who are exposed to pesticides, you can see there's significant developmental damage. They cannot draw anything that remotely looks like a person. They've been damaged. Of course, this is dismissed as, oh, this is anecdotal. You know, there's no evidence that this is due to pesticides. 1998. Now we have a lot of studies. I put 4 of them there from just a few years ago, showing that the smallest amount of organophosphates causes damage to the developing brain. And one of the studies from Columbia University could not find a minimum level of exposure. We have no data at all what is a safe level. That research hasn't been done. You know, they went down to the smallest levels, which are parts per billion, which is 1,000 times lower than what is regarded as safe, and still found damage. And this damage happens in utero. In this case, it's because mum has eaten conventional food, because the majority of the pesticide residues we get is through eating food. Sorry. I just want to end here. And the science that we use for looking and establishing the safety of pesticides was excellent science in the 1840s and 50s, where you fed animals, you destroyed them, you cut them up, and you looked at their tissues under a microscope, and you know, to see if there's any difference. And then you say there's no difference, so therefore it's safe. Fantastic, but you know, what the regulators haven't realised is science has actually moved on a little bit since the 1850s. You know, we've got things like electricity, electric lights and cars, you know. And we also have ways of looking at children's brains. We don't have to kill them and cut them up and look at their brains under a microscope. We can use things like MRI scans. And this is one of the studies where they've looked at the difference between children who have been exposed to small amounts of pesticides and those that haven't. And what they can clearly show is brain damage, is the nice way to put it. Clear differences in the development in children. So I want to end with this, because our children are our future. And what are we doing damaging them? That we expect that 1 in 2 children in 20 years' time will have autism and other developmental disorders. We can see this happening. The rise in cancers and endocrine disruption and other diseases, behavioural diseases that were happening, that we have hundreds of scientific papers showing the biophysical links. We know how it happens. We can see that it's happening, and yet nothing is being done about it. So I suppose what I want to end with is that I think the most critical thing that we can do for our future as a species, for our children and grandchildren, is to get this information out to consumers, why we need to have food free of pesticides. Our children are too important to worry about, it costs a bit more or something like that. How much does it cost to have 50% of children with autism? Thank you.